and B, for most of the people who read fiction in the Western world, I think his interpretation of elves has been seminal in forming that image and stuff, so it would be pointless not to talk about it. So I thought I'll just make a few quick jokes, really, almost at the expense of it, because yes, I should say something about it, and I wanted to be nice about it. And obviously I have stolen them hook, line and sinker from him, and just sort of slightly merged them with more Scandinavian visions of elves, with the two-dimensional face thing and all that other mythological stuff. So yes, that's what I did.
Elf rock star.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, when I grew up, when I was a girl many years ago, I was completely into heavy metal and goth music and everything like that. And for me, that sort of blends the elf and the glam rock god are very similar in my mind. So that's why I did that.
Well, David Bowie is kind of elvish.
That's right.
Yeah.
There are lots of elves in the rock community, I'm sure, secretly hanging out.
Merging fantasy and science fiction the way you do, you must be very interested in both worlds. Have you read a lot of science fiction as well as fantasy?
I haven't read as much science fiction as I should have, probably. People are always talking about the greats, and usually I haven't read half of those. I think most of my science fiction influences have been from movies as well as books, and apart from the classics of the Asimov and the Clarke and stuff, I've mostly read more modern science fiction. And especially in the 80s, there was a thing called British New Wave, where people like Colin Greenland and Mike Harrison had started to write much more dark and experimental and strange things, and I was more into that kind of side of it, really.
There's a lot of race politics in your books between between like elves and humans and
demons and demons.
And that's a very conscious decision from your part, I imagine.
Yes, when I first started writing about it, as usual, I didn't think it through, and I just started writing, and then it seemed obvious to me that the elves were very much pitched in this sort of nature spirit kind of way, and they were almost eco-greenies, although some of them are quite nasty. Whereas the demons, on the other hand, who are not necessarily, they're not like the Christian demons, as opposed to angels or something like that. They are also, in their way, like spirits, sort of in the ancient Greek form, but more spirits of art. And they're completely infused with the desire to go forth and express themselves absolutely as much as possible on every possible occasion, in every possible way, and to drive it to the extreme, whereas the elves are much more reserved and, I would say, conservative and conservationist and very regulated and hierarchical. So as soon as that contrast started to appear and others, I realised there was going to be all these tensions between them. And yes, you just couldn't avoid writing about it, really.
The quantum bomb, that is the root of the dimensional split, as you might call it. How did you get that idea?
Well, it was necessary to come up with something to explain how all these things could possibly coexist. And whilst the robotics end of it and the technological side sat quite well with the science fictional universe, in which you can have any amount of science and rationalism, the rest of it clearly couldn't possibly exist, it seemed to me, in the same way, especially if, as I wanted to have, the human world would have the same history as ours has up to a point in the near future. So I had been thinking at the time mostly about this contrast between science fiction being a very outward-orientated kind of fiction about human beings and how they react to the material world and everything that they can do with it, whereas fantasy is much more almost like pure narrative and pure myth. It's all about the inner landscape of each individual person, although we have shared that across whole cultures and societies. It's got these tropes and archetypes and stereotypes which are much truer to the lived experience of being a human being on the inside. And so I thought it would be cool if somehow I could say that the inside has exploded to the outside somehow. And then the quantum bomb, although the technology and exactly how it worked is not really described, that's what happened. There was an event precipitated by an experiment, perhaps like one of these particle accelerator experiments, in which things interacted with somebody's consciousness who must have been reading a lot of books in this store, and then that's what happened.
Lila Black is a very, very interesting character because she's very, very flawed, and yet she's, in a sense, perfect. This creates a very interesting conflict in her mind, sort of emotional damage, if you will, and it's very common among your characters. Is this something that is a conscious decision, or do they just come out that way?
Both. They do come out that way, but also it's a conscious decision. I think part of us, partly as a reaction to being brought up on a lot of American science fiction movies and fantasy movies in which heroes are emotionally at least strong enough or stupid enough not to notice things that might bother us lesser mortals, and just sort of steamroller their way to success almost without, in an untouched way psychologically. It seems to me there's a lot of that going on in the fiction that I was exposed to, and it just struck me as incredibly unrealistic. And it made their adventures less sympathetic and also less emotionally engaging. And the more that I read and as I got older, I really wanted to come across fiction which was emotionally challenging. And while I don't always want to be put through the ringer, I do want to engage with the characters and go through a story which for me is rich and meaningful. And as more the time goes on, the more that means you have to encounter everyone's flaws. And I'm not everybody, but I have enough flaws to sort of put them in all the characters and spread them about. So that's kind of what I try to do.
Do you have a favourite character in the Quantum Gravity series?
Oh, I like Zal the Elf because he's like an incarnation of the Divine Fool, really. He managed at some point in his history, they don't ever really discover exactly how, to cross over from being someone who was brought up in a very rigid, hierarchically organised society in which there are definite rules about how to behave and who you can be and how you can express it. And he made some radical decision at some point. I'm just not like that, so I can't deal with this anymore. I'm going to be myself, whatever it takes. And he sort of worked his way through from starting in a covert way, and then eventually progressing to the point where he crosses over into what's the other side, Demonia, which is the polar opposite of the elf world, and states his claim, says, I am a demon at heart and nothing like an elf. And he's so good at it that the demons accept him as one of their own. At which point, so he's a completely, I don't know, I suppose spiritually self-actualized person. And he just goes through the rest of the books following his heart, doing whatever he wants. And sometimes it gets him killed, but he manages to come back. That's a long story.
So have you planned an end to the series?
Yes. There is an end. Well, it's sort of, you know, some of the people have lives that go on beyond it, but there's an end to the story in book 5.
So Zal is the character you will miss the most?
Yeah, definitely.
There are probably a lot of people here who haven't read the books yet. How would you describe the Quantum Gravity series in short? That was a tricky question.
Well, I know, I should have had this well prepared. Hours on that plane thinking, oh, right, okay. These books are basically a series of adventure stories featuring central characters, but because of the way that those characters are made up, they've got aspects of science fiction, technology, very hard science fiction, also combined with aspects of deep fantasy, elves, fairies, lots of fairies, they're not very nice ones, magic and science clash, and it's all like a big party of silliness, really, but serious silliness. So that's kind of what they're like.
I guess that was all the questions I had, but I'm guessing that some of the audience might have questions. You're very welcome.